In January, the Attorney General's office released the results of an 18-month investigation into allegations of child sexual abuse by members of the clergy in North Dakota's 2 Catholic dioceses. This investigation was prompted after the Bismarck and Fargo dioceses released a list in 2019 of 53 people with allegations of child sexual abuse. Haley Boland takes a look at the state of clergy abuse in North Dakota.
Of the 53 named individuals, all but 2 had died by the time the investigation commenced. The 2 priests still living were Norman Ducart of Dickinson and John Owens, who had moved to Minnesota but died in October 2020 while the investigation was ongoing. Through the course of the investigation, the North Dakota Attorney General's office identified in this report a 3rd perpetrator not under the jurisdiction of the dioceses, Otto Mugley, a priest at Assumption Abbey in Richardton. Allegations against Norman Ducart and Otto Mugley date back to the 1970s. Ultimately, the Attorney General's office ruled that the statute of limitations had run out on all allegations against Mugley and Ducart, so they could not be charged.
I think that's unfortunate. I wish that we had had the opportunity to bring them into court where they could face the charges and respond accordingly.
Otto Mugley still lives at Assumption Abbey in Richardton, but was unavailable for comment on the case. Abbot Daniel Maloney, head of Assumption Abbey, has known and worked with Mugley for many years. Do you think he's capable of the things that are in the report from the Attorney General?
Possibly, yes.
Abbot Maloney says he feels many of the past allegations stem from a lack of education in members of the clergy.
Some things that might seem harmless in ordinary family life might present a problem when you're dealing with outside peoples.
The report from the Bureau of Criminal Investigation states that Assumption Abbey was notified of sexual abuse allegations against Otto Mugley in 1991. Maloney says Mugley has been on a safety plan since then, meaning that he has not been involved in ministry and works in the business office for Assumption Abbey. Your News leader was able to confirm through the Attorney General's office and neighbors that Norman Ducart still lives at the Dickinson address listed in the BCI report. Yeah. So Norman Ducart does live there? Okay. We attempted to get a comment on the case from Ducart, but he did not answer. Ducart served under the Bismarck Diocese. Bishop David Kagan says even though Ducart could not be charged, he feels the results of the investigation are sufficient. Do you feel at all that the system or the church failed the victims in the report?
No. We addressed the issues. That's something for the state to try and reconcile.
Kagan also supports the statute of limitations in cases like these.
The statute of limitations does serve a purpose that as time goes on, people's memories and recollections aren't as accurate.
During the 2019 legislative session, North Dakota lawmakers extended the statute of limitations for cases of sexual abuse, but current law and a Supreme Court ruling prevent that from being applied retroactively. Since the Attorney General's office was unable to charge any of the priests, they have no grounds to be on a registered sex offender list, with the Attorney General saying this.
Because they're based on convictions, not just on anything else. They have to be convicted in a court of law.
Which allows Ducart to live just down the street from Dickinson Head Start, a preschool in town. In North Dakota, a high-risk sex offender may not reside within 500 feet of a school. Google Maps shows door-to-door Ducart's home and Head Start are about 0.1 mile or 528 feet away from each other. But the property lines are much closer, with an alleyway connecting the two. We contacted Head Start to see if our findings raised concern for the school, and they refused to comment.
Tomorrow, the story of a survivor of clergy abuse. You can find the full Attorney General's report on our website. Last night, we told you the statute of limitations expired so that 2 Catholic priests in North Dakota accused of and investigated for sexual abuse could not be prosecuted. But Haley Boland tells us for those who say they were victims, time has not erased the memories.
Statutes of limitations are put into place to keep criminal charges based on evidence that hasn't deteriorated over time. But for survivors of clergy sexual abuse, forgetting what happened to them doesn't come easily. We spoke with a North Dakotan who experienced abuse decades ago, but says his life hasn't been the same since. Richard Jangula, a 63-year-old North Dakotan from Zeeland, says he was 18 years old when he was sexually assaulted by a priest.
Forgiving people, is pretty easy, but forgetting is impossible.
In 1979, Jangula had run into Father Gregory Patego at the Bismarck Airport after flying home from Colorado. Patego was the priest at St. Andrew's Church in Zeeland at the time, where Jangula's family attended.
Told me he'd give me a ride back home, and that's when it happened. And, it is what it is, I guess, now.
He did not tell his family about the abuse when it happened.
In the 70s, you couldn't say anything. I mean, you could have, but nobody did. You're ashamed of it,
Since the abuse, Jangula began to have many health issues as he entered his 20s, which he says he attributes to stress related to the incident.
Had bleeding ulcers. I ended up in the hospital in Minot, North Dakota, and didn't know how to handle it.
In 1994, Jangula says he reported his abuse to the Fargo Diocese and settled with the Catholic Church for nearly $40,000 to help cover his extensive medical bills. After speaking publicly about his abuse in the late 2000s, Jangula received pushback from fellow parishioners.
He said to me, you should have kept your mouth shut. That was a priest. That's the problem.
Even after all he's been through, Jangula doesn't place the blame on churches themselves.
Like I said, I don't blame the church. I blame the Vatican. I really do. Because they've known this crap all the time. And I don't hate nobody. But I wish that they would understand of the lives that they've destroyed.
Still, despite all the darkness, decades later and now legally blind,
Good morning, sunshine.
Jangula says he's kept the faith.
Forgetting is impossible. It is impossible. And sometimes I think God wants you to remember things so it doesn't happen again.
Jangula also credits his children and grandchildren for being the force that keeps him going. The Fargo Diocese did not return our request for comment on Jangula's case. The Attorney General's office still has an active reporting line for victims of clergy sexual abuse. You can submit a report via email to ndag@nd.gov or call the toll-free tip line at 1-800-472-2185.